My name is Preston Vale, and I'm worth $2.8 billion. But none of that mattered when I watched my 23-year-old daughter face down two armed robbers with nothing but her voice and her courage. Cordelia had been working as a waitress at Mabel's diner for 8 months, insisting she didn't want my money, that she needed to make her own way in the world. I thought I was just being a protective father when I started showing up there once a week, sitting in the back corner booth, watching her work without her knowing I was there. Tuesday night, September 15th, 9:47 p.m. I was nursing my third cup of coffee, proud of how she handled every difficult customer with grace, when two masked men burst through that front door. One had a shotgun, the other a pistol. Every instinct I had screamed at me to protect my child, but I was frozen 30 feet away, helpless despite all my wealth and power. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about courage, about my daughter, and about what it really means to save someone's life. Because while I sat there terrified, Cordelia did something that shocked everyone in that diner, including the armed men who thought they were in control. She didn't just survive what happened that night, she changed it. And what I discovered about her training, about her secret preparation for moments like this, about who she really was beneath the surface I thought I knew so well. That revelation didn't just save lives that night. It transformed how I see strength, how I see my role as a father, and how I now spend every dollar I've ever earned. Let me take you back to how this all started, because you need to understand the relationship I had with my daughter, to truly grasp why that night changed everything. Cordelia had always been headstrong, even as a little girl. When she turned 18, she sat me down in my study and said something that still echoes in my mind. "Dad, I love you, but I need to know who I am when I'm not Preston Vale's daughter. I need to earn my own way." That was 5 years ago. She refused every offer of help I made. Full ride scholarship to any university? No. Luxury apartment near campus? Absolutely not. Even a modest allowance while she studied social work at Northwestern. She looked at me like I'd insulted her intelligence. Instead, she took out student loans, found a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that kept me awake at night worrying, and got a job waitressing at Mabel's Diner on the south side of downtown. For 8 months, I respected her boundaries. I stayed away, sent the occasional text, met her for coffee once a month at neutral locations where we'd make small talk about her classes and carefully avoid discussing her job or my concerns about her safety. But the worry was eating me alive. My little girl was working until midnight in a part of town where my security team had advised me never to go alone. So I started my secret visits. Every Tuesday night, same routine. I'd put on jeans and a baseball cap, drive my oldest car instead of the Bentley, and slip into the back corner booth at Mabel's around 9 o'clock. The first time I saw her there, wearing that yellow uniform with her hair pulled back, carrying coffee pots and taking orders like she'd been doing it her whole life, I felt this strange mixture of pride and heartbreak. Mabel's Diner was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, classic American diner. Red vinyl booths with duct tape patches, black and white checkered floors that had seen better decades, and a neon sign outside that flickered between Mabel's and Mabes, depending on its mood. The place served truckers making late-night runs, factory workers getting off second shift, and locals who counted every dollar before ordering. The coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and the atmosphere was pure working-class America. That Tuesday night in September, I was watching Cordelia handle what had to be the most difficult customer I'd ever seen. Big Mike, a trucker who'd been coming there for years, was drunk and getting belligerent about his order taking too long. Most waitresses would have called the manager or refused to serve him. Cordelia walked right up to his table, sat down across from him and said, "Mike, you've had a rough day, haven't you? Tell me what's going on." 20 minutes later, she had him eating soup and talking about his divorce like she was a therapist instead of a waitress. I watched this interaction thinking I was seeing my daughter's compassion in action, her natural ability to connect with people. I had no idea I was actually watching her put professional crisis intervention training into practice. Mrs. Hendricks, an elderly woman who came in twice a week for coffee and pie, was sitting 3 booths away from me. She'd been coming to Mabel since her husband died 2 years earlier, and everyone knew her Social Security barely covered her rent and medications. When she finished her coffee that night, she started digging through her purse for change, obviously stressed about the tip. That's when Cordelia appeared at her table. "Don't worry about the tip tonight, honey. You've got enough to worry about with your medication costs. Besides, you always tip me with something better than money." Mrs. Hendricks looked confused and Cordelia continued, "You tip me with stories about Mr. Hendricks and how you two used to dance in your kitchen. Those stories are worth more than any dollar amount." Mrs. Hendricks started crying right there in the booth, and Cordelia sat down and held her hand until she composed herself. I'm sitting 30 feet away, thinking my daughter is just naturally kind and empathetic, proud of the values I thought I'd taught her. I couldn't have been more wrong about what I was actually witnessing. The diner had that comfortable late evening energy that night. Classic rock played softly from speakers that had probably been installed in the 1980s. The smell of coffee mixed with apple pie and the faint scent of cigarette smoke that seemed permanently embedded in the vinyl booths. Jerry, the night cook, was visible through the kitchen window, and besides Mrs. Hendricks and Big Mike, there were only 3 other customers scattered around the place. I was feeling that familiar mixture of pride and worry that had become my constant companion since Cordelia started working there. Pride because she was clearly good at her job, respected by customers and coworkers alike. Worry because I knew this neighborhood, knew the statistics about late-night robberies, knew that my daughter was choosing to put herself in danger every week for reasons I still didn't fully understand. At 9:47 p.m., I was finishing my 3rd cup of coffee and debating whether to order a piece of pie just to have an excuse to stay longer and watch her work. Cordelia was wiping down the counter, humming along to an old Eagles song, completely relaxed and in her element. Jerry was cleaning the grill, Mrs. Hendricks was reading a paperback novel, and Big Mike was sobering up over his 2nd bowl of soup. It was one of those perfectly ordinary moments that you remember with crystal clarity because of what happened next. The kind of moment that becomes a before picture in your memory, the last few seconds when everything was normal and safe and predictable. I had no way of knowing that everything I thought I understood about my daughter was about to be shattered, or that the next 10 minutes would reveal truths that would change both our lives forever. At 9:52 p.m., the front door of Mabel's diner exploded open with a force that made the little bell above it scream instead of chime. 2 men in dark hoodies and ski masks burst through, and the peaceful evening I'd been enjoying shattered like glass hitting concrete. The first man through the door carried a pump-action shotgun that looked like it could blow a hole through a car engine. The second man had a silver pistol that caught the diner's fluorescent lights as he waved it around the room. Time does something strange in moments like that. Everything slows down and speeds up simultaneously. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, but I could also process every tiny detail with surgical precision. The way the first gunman's hands shook slightly as he gripped his weapon, the scuff marks on the second man's worn sneakers, the smell of cold night air and something else, something sharp and metallic that I later realized was my own fear. Everyone on the ground. "Right now, everyone down!" The man with the shotgun had a voice that cracked on the edges, young and scared but trying to sound dangerous. "Empty that register! Move! Now!" Mrs. Hendricks dropped her paperback novel and started making small whimpering sounds. Her hands pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold her heart inside her body. Big Mike, who had been sobered up by his soup just minutes earlier, slowly raised his massive hands above his head, his eyes wide with the kind of clarity that only comes from sudden, absolute sobriety. I could see Jerry through the kitchen window, his face pale as paper, slowly emerging with his hands visible. And there I was, Preston Vale, billionaire entrepreneur who had negotiated hostile takeovers with Russian oligarchs and faced down boardroom coup that could have cost me hundreds of millions of dollars. Completely paralyzed in a vinyl booth 30 feet from my daughter. All that money, all that power, all those connections and resources, and I was as helpless as a child watching a nightmare unfold. I set everyone on the ground. The second gunman, the one with the pistol, was getting more agitated by the second. His voice was higher, more volatile than his partner's. "You people deaf? Down, now." Mrs. Hendricks tried to slide out of her booth to get on the floor, but her arthritic knees weren't cooperating. She was crying openly now, these heartbreaking little sobs that mixed with whispered prayers. Big Mike was already on his knees, with his hands behind his head, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd unfortunately been in situations like this before. But Cordelia hadn't moved from behind the counter. She wasn't frozen with fear like I was. She wasn't panicking like Mrs. Hendricks or surrendering like Big Mike. She was standing perfectly still, her hands visible but not raised, watching both gunmen with the kind of focused attention I'd seen her use when studying for exams. It was like she was analyzing them, calculating something I couldn't understand. "You," and the shotgun carrier noticed her immediately. "Girl behind the counter, get that register open and get down on the floor. Now!" "I'll open the register for you," Cordelia said, and her voice was so calm it made the hair on my arms stand up. "But I need you to let Mrs. Hendricks sit back down in that booth. She has a serious heart condition, and lying on this floor could trigger an episode that could kill her." The silence that followed her words was deafening. The two gunmen looked at each other, clearly not expecting negotiation from someone they thought they were terrorizing. The one with the pistol took 3 quick steps toward the counter, his weapon pointed directly at my daughter's chest. "You think you're running this show?" he screamed, and I could see spit flying from behind his mask. "You think you get to make demands?" Cordelia maintained perfect eye contact with him, her hands moving slowly and deliberately toward the cash register. "I'm not making demands. I'm trying to help everyone in here stay safe, and that includes both of you. The register has maybe $300 in it. Is that amount of money worth escalating this situation into something that changes all our lives forever?" I felt like I was watching my daughter speak a language I'd never heard before. This wasn't the compassionate young woman who had comforted Mrs. Hendricks about her tip money 30 minutes earlier. This wasn't the patient waitress who had talked Big Mike through his divorce troubles. This was someone else entirely, someone who understood violence and fear and desperation in ways that terrified me. "What did you just say to me?" The pistol gunman moved closer, close enough that I could see Cordelia's reflection in his eyes through the mask holes. "Did you just tell me what this is worth?" The shotgun carrier put a hand on his partner's shoulder. "Devin, calm down. She's opening the register." Devin. Now we had a name, and Cordelia caught it immediately. I watched her file that information away like she was building a profile, like she was working from some kind of playbook I'd never seen before. "Devin, your friend is right," she said, punching keys on the register with steady fingers. "You're both scared, and that's completely understandable. This is a scary situation for everyone. But look around this room. You see anyone here who looks like they're going to give you trouble?" The register drawer opened with its familiar ding, a sound I'd heard dozens of times during my secret visits. But tonight it sounded like a gunshot, sharp and final in the charged air of the diner. "Mrs. Hendricks is 74 years old and weighs maybe 90 pounds. Cordelia continued, counting bills with the same methodical precision she used for every transaction. "Big Mike there has been drinking, and he's got 3 kids at home he needs to get back to safely. Jerry's a good man who just wants to finish his shift and go home to his wife. Nobody here is your enemy." "Shut up." Devin's voice cracked completely. "Just shut up and give us the money." But something was happening that I couldn't quite process. The more agitated Devin became, the calmer Cordelia seemed to get. It was like she was drawing his fear and anger out of the air and transforming it into something else, something manageable. "There's $347 here," she said, holding up the bills so both men could see them. "And there's a safe in the back office that Jerry can open for you. But Devin, I need you to understand something important. Right now, this is robbery. Nobody's hurt. Nobody's been threatened with serious harm. You can both walk out of here in 5 minutes and this stays robbery." The shotgun carrier, the one who wasn't Devin, nodded slightly. I could see him processing her words, understanding the distinction she was making. But Devin was spiraling, the pistol shaking in his hands. "Stop talking," he shouted. "Stop saying my name. How do you know my name?" And that's when I realized my daughter wasn't just staying calm under pressure. She wasn't just being brave in the face of danger. She was using specific techniques, following some kind of training or protocol that she'd never mentioned to me in any of our conversations. About her life at Northwestern. I heard your friend say it, Cordelia replied, her voice never changing tone or tempo. And I'm saying it because names matter. You're not just the guy with the gun to me. You're Devin. You're a person, and I believe you're a better person than this situation is making you appear to be. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see both gunmen struggling with something they clearly hadn't expected to encounter in a simple robbery. My daughter had just turned a holdup into a conversation about human dignity, and I had absolutely no idea how or why she knew how to do that. What happened next still haunts my dreams, but not for the reasons you might think. As I watched my daughter navigate this nightmare with skills I never knew she possessed, I realized I was witnessing something that would fundamentally change how I understood everything about her, about courage, and about what it really means to protect the people you love. Devin was getting more unstable by the second, the pistol shaking in his grip like a live wire. But instead of backing down or showing fear, Cordelia did something that made my blood run cold and my heart swell with pride simultaneously. She stepped slightly forward, closing the distance between herself and the weapon pointed at her chest. "Marcus," she said, addressing the shotgun carrier directly, and I realized she'd been listening, cataloging, building psychological profiles of both men while I'd been sitting there paralyzed. "That's your name, right? I can see you're uncomfortable with how this is going. You keep looking at the door, checking your watch. You didn't expect it to take this long, and you definitely didn't expect Devin to get this agitated." The shotgun carrier, Marcus, shifted his weight from foot to foot. I could see the conflict playing across his face even through the ski mask. "We just want the money," he said, and his voice was different from Devin's, quieter, less volatile. "That's all we came for." "I know that," Cordelia replied, her hands moving deliberately as she organized the bills from the register. "And I'm going to give you every dollar that's here. But Marcus, I need you to help me help your friend, because Devin's scared, and scared people make decisions they regret for the rest of their lives." That's when it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My daughter wasn't just staying calm under pressure. She wasn't just being naturally empathetic or inherently brave. She was implementing a systematic approach to crisis de-escalation that required training, practice, and a level of psychological understanding that you don't just stumble into. She was working from a playbook, following protocols that had been drilled into her through hours of instruction and simulation. "Devin," she continued, turning her attention back to the more volatile gunman, "I can see your hands shaking. That tells me you're running on pure adrenaline right now, which makes everything feel more intense and more dangerous than it actually is. When did you last eat something?" "What?" Devin's voice cracked with confusion. "What kind of question is that?" It's an important question because low blood sugar amplifies anxiety and makes it harder to think clearly. "You're making decisions right now that are going to affect the rest of your life, and I want to make sure you're making them with a clear head." I watched this exchange with a mixture of terror and awe. My daughter was treating an armed robbery like a counseling session, and somehow, impossibly, it was working. Devin's aggressive posture was softening slightly, his breathing becoming less erratic. But that's when the true magnitude of what I was witnessing hit me. This wasn't improvisation. This wasn't natural talent or inherited people skills. This was professional competence in action, and it meant that for months, maybe years, my daughter had been preparing for moments exactly like this one. "Jerry," Cordelia called to the cook, who was still standing frozen by the kitchen window. "Can you open the safe for these gentlemen?" Jerry nodded rapidly, his Adam's apple bobbing with nervous swallows. Yes, of course, it's in the office. There's maybe $800 in there, mostly tips and the weekend deposit." "Thank you, Jerry," Cordelia said, and then she did something that made my heart stop completely. She removed her name tag from her uniform and placed it deliberately on the counter where both gunmen could see it. "My name is Cordelia Vale," she announced, making herself completely vulnerable in a way that defied every survival instinct a person should have. "I'm a student at Northwestern University studying social work and crisis intervention. I work Here Tuesday nights, I live at 412 Maple Street, and I'm giving you my full name and address because I want you both to understand that I trust you to be better than this situation is making you appear." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the ancient fluorescent lights humming overhead, the distant sound of traffic on the street outside, and my own heart hammering against my ribcage like it was trying to escape. My daughter had just identified herself to armed criminals, had given them enough information to find her later, had made herself a target in ways that violated every rule of personal safety I'd ever taught her. But she wasn't done. Devin, Marcus, you're both young. I can tell by your voices, by the way you move. You're probably not much older than I am. That means you have decades of life ahead of you, decades of chances to be proud of the choices you make. Right now, you can walk out of here with this money and this stays a robbery. Nobody's hurt, nobody's traumatized beyond what's already happened, and you both get to wake up tomorrow knowing you didn't cross a line you can never step back over. Marcus lowered his shotgun slightly. "She's making sense, Devin. We got what we came for." But Devin was spiraling in the other direction, the pistol now pointed directly at Cordelia's face. "How do we know you won't call the cops the second we leave? How do we know this isn't some kind of trap? Because calling the cops is already handled," Cordelia said with a calmness that made my blood freeze. "Someone in here pressed a silent alarm within 30 seconds of you walking through that door. The police are probably already on their way. You have maybe 3 minutes to make a choice about who you want to be when they arrive." That's when I realized what my daughter had been doing this entire time. She hadn't just been de-escalating the situation and protecting the customers. She had been managing time, controlling the pace of the encounter, keeping everyone safe while allowing the natural consequences of their actions to unfold. She had turned a chaotic, violent situation into a structured intervention with a clear timeline and specific objectives. And that's also when I realized I had to make a choice of my own. Every instinct I had as a father screamed at me to intervene, to use my wealth and connections to somehow fix this situation, to protect my daughter the way I'd always protected her from consequences and challenges throughout her life. I had my phone in my pocket with direct lines to private security firms that could have men with military training at this location in minutes. But watching her work, seeing her professional competence in action, understanding that she was operating from knowledge and training that I had never been part of, I made the hardest decision of my parenting life. I chose to trust her. I chose to believe that my daughter knew what she was doing in a way that I absolutely did not. Instead of calling for backup, I activated the silent GPS tracker on my phone, sending my location to my security team with instructions to monitor but not intervene unless I sent a specific distress code. It was the most terrifying act of faith I'd ever performed, choosing to let my daughter handle a life-threatening situation with skills I'd never known she possessed rather than rushing in with resources and power that might make everything worse. "The police will be here soon," Cordelia continued, her voice never wavering. "But you still have time to choose how this story ends. You can be the two men who robbed a diner and left everyone unharmed, or you can be something else entirely. But Marcus, Devin, once you cross certain lines, you can never uncross them, and I believe you're both better people than your worst moment." What happened in the next 90 seconds defied everything I thought I understood about human nature, about violence, and about the power of one person to change the trajectory of a disaster. The moment Cordelia finished speaking about crossing lines they couldn't uncross, something shifted in the air of that diner. It was like watching a fever break, watching the temperature of pure panic begin to cool into something else entirely. Marcus was the first to respond. He lowered his shotgun until it was pointing at the floor instead of at the room full of people. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "She's right, Devin. This lady is right. We came here for money, not to hurt people. We got the money." But Devin was still spiraling, the pistol shaking in his hands like he was fighting an internal war between fear and rage. "How do we know she won't identify us? How do we know the cops aren't already surrounding this place? She knows too much about us now." "The police are already coming," Cordelia said with that same unnatural calm that had been carrying her through this entire ordeal. Someone in here triggered a silent alarm within the first minute you walked through that door. But Devin, listen to me very carefully. You have maybe 90 seconds to decide what story you want the police to find when they get here. The words hit Devin like a slap. His eyes went wide behind the ski mask, and I could see him processing the reality that time wasn't just running out. It had already run out. They weren't in control of this situation and probably never had been. 90 seconds to decide if you want to be remembered as the two men who robbed a diner and left everyone unharmed, or as something much worse, Cordelia continued. Because everything that happens from this moment forward is a choice. Your choice. That's when Devin did something that made my heart stop. He turned the pistol toward Mrs. Hendricks, who was still quietly crying in her booth, and his voice cracked with desperation. Maybe we take someone with us. Maybe we make sure nobody follows us. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. Mrs. Hendricks looked up from her paperback novel with eyes that had seen 74 years of life, and seemed to understand that she might not see 75. Big Mike tensed like he was preparing to charge across the room, despite being unarmed and outgunned. Jerry gripped the edge of the kitchen window so hard his knuckles went white, and Cordelia stepped around the counter. She didn't run toward the back office or dive behind something for cover. She walked directly into the line of fire, putting herself between Devin's weapon and Mrs. Hendricks, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than training or education. Devin, look at me. Not at her, at me. My name is Cordelia Vale. I'm 23 years old. I'm a social work student at Northwestern University, and I've been training in crisis intervention and de-escalation for 3 years. I chose to work in this neighborhood because I knew situations like this happened here, and I wanted to be someone who could help when they did. Devin's gun was now pointed directly at my daughter's chest from a distance of maybe 4 feet. I could see his finger on the trigger, could see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. Everything in my body screamed at me to move, to throw myself between them, to use my wealth and power and connections to stop this nightmare from getting worse. But I also understood something that I'd never grasped before in my entire life. My daughter wasn't a victim in this situation. She wasn't someone who needed rescuing or protecting. She was the professional, the expert, the person most qualified to handle this crisis. And if I interfered now, if I let my parental panic override her professional competence, I might get everyone in that diner killed. I've been working with people in crisis for 3 years, Cordelia continued, never breaking eye contact with Devin. I've talked to men who were ready to hurt their families, women who were planning to hurt themselves, teenagers who thought violence was their only option. And you know what I've learned? Hurt people hurt people, but healed people heal people. And right now, in this moment, you get to choose which one you are. Marcus stepped closer to his partner, the shotgun now completely lowered. Devin, come on, man. She's just a kid trying to help people. Look around this room. Look at these people. They're not our enemies. I volunteered at the crisis center downtown every weekend for 2 years before I started working here, Cordelia said, and suddenly everything was clicking into place for me. The late nights she couldn't account for, the psychology textbooks I'd seen in her apartment, the way she'd handled difficult customers with techniques that seemed too sophisticated for someone who was just naturally empathetic. I've been trained to recognize when someone is scared versus when someone is dangerous. And Devin, you're scared. You're not a dangerous person. You're a scared young man who made a bad decision, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. Devin's hand began to tremble more violently, and I realized he was crying behind the ski mask. I don't know how to get out of this, he whispered, and the desperation in his voice was heartbreaking. Yes, you do, Cordelia replied immediately. You put the gun down, you walk out that door with Marcus, and you never do anything like this again. The police are going to be here in less than 60 seconds, but if you leave now, right now, you have a head start. You have a chance to disappear and become someone better than this moment. What about the money? Marcus asked, and I could hear in his voice that he was already mentally out the door. Take it, Cordelia said without hesitation. Take every dollar from the register and the safe. but leave these people their lives and their peace of mind intact. And then Devin did something that I will remember for the rest of my life. He looked directly at Mrs. Hendricks, who was still sitting in her booth with tears streaming down her cheeks, and he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm really sorry. I didn't want to scare you." Mrs. Hendricks, this 74-year-old woman who had been through a divorce, the death of her husband, financial struggles, and now an armed robbery, looked right back at him and said, "I forgive. You, son. I hope you find whatever you're looking for." Devin lowered the pistol completely and looked at Cordelia. "How do you know we won't come back? How do you know we won't hurt you later for helping the police identify us?" "Because you're not that kind of person," Cordelia said with absolute certainty. "If you were, you would have hurt someone already. You've had multiple opportunities to use those weapons, and you haven't. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are underneath all this fear and desperation." Marcus was already moving toward the door, stuffing bills from the register into his pockets. "Devin, we gotta go, now." But Devin paused at the counter and looked at my daughter one more time. "Why did you help us? Why didn't you just give us the money and stay quiet?" "Because helping people is what I do," Cordelia replied. "And that includes helping you make choices you can live with. You don't have to carry the weight of hurting innocent people for the rest of your life. You get to walk out of here knowing that everyone in this room is safe, and that has value beyond any amount of money." Devin nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head, and then both men were gone, disappearing into the night with $347 from the register and about $800 from the safe. The little bell above the door chimed once as they left, a sound that seemed impossibly cheerful after the terror of the previous 10 minutes. And in the sudden quiet that followed their departure, as we all sat there processing what had just happened, I heard the distant wail of police sirens approaching from 3 different directions. My daughter had been right about the timing. She had managed that entire crisis with the precision of a surgeon, the compassion of a counselor, and the courage of someone twice her age with 10 times her experience. She had saved everyone in that diner, including the 2 men who had come to rob us.